We can get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Research America Alliance discussion. My name is Tori Schneider, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today on Zoom and for your partnership in the Research America Alliance. I hope everyone is looking forward to this discussion today as much as I am. But first, we'll start with just a little administrative housekeeping. If your organization is not a member of the Research America Alliance, I hope you'll shoot Joel, our Director of Membership, whose email will be put in the chat, an email to discuss joining us. So without further ado, today we are joined by Dr. Jon Lorsch, Director of the National Institute of General Medical Sciences at NIH. We've asked Dr. Lorsch to provide us with an update on the Institute's role in bringing about more sustainable and inclusive career paths for early career researchers across health-focused research and engineering disciplines. I know personally, coming from an academic research background, I'm really interested in today's presentation and have a lot of great questions, and I'm sure you all do too. So during the presentation, please type your questions into the Q&A box or the chat, and we will pose as many as we can today during the Q&A portion. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Lorsch, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Tori. Let me just share my screen. All right, can you see that?
Yep, looks great.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, so as Tori said, I'm here to give you an update on some of NIGMS's programs and initiatives, and then we'll hopefully have time at the end for some discussion. So I want to start by giving you an overview of NIGMS sort of at a glance, because not all of you may be familiar with the Institute. I then want to talk about our flagship Maximizing Investigators Research Award, or MIRA program, then some of our training, workforce development, and diversity initiatives. And then finally, I'll tell you a little bit about the Institutional Development Award, or IDEA program. So NIGMS at a glance, the main focus of the Institute in terms of our science that we support is fundamental, or also called basic research. So this is research aimed at understanding the molecular, cellular, physiological basis of living systems, with a goal of building the foundation on which research that's focused on specific diseases or organ systems can be launched. We also have a few clinical areas of responsibility. These are areas that cover multiple organ systems, and an example of that is sepsis. Another example is anesthesiology research. In addition to our scientific areas, we have the largest training, workforce development, and diversity, as well as research capacity building portfolios at NIH, actually by quite a lot. And so you can think of us as the Basic Science Research Institute and the Training, Workforce Development, Diversity, and Capacity Building Institute. For some reference, in fiscal year 23, NIGMS's appropriation was $3.239 billion. So we have a substantial base given to us by Congress with which to work. So I want to start with the Maximizing Investigators Research Award, or MIRA program, and give you an update on where that stands. This started as a experiment in a new paradigm for how NIH can support fundamental investigator-initiated research. The way it works is that we give one grant per principal investigator, and that grant is to provide support for their NIGMS-related research program, so the collection of projects in their lab that are related to the mission of NIGMS. Once they have this grant, they cannot apply for other NIGMS research grants, with a few minor exceptions, and so it's really a one grant per investigator model. Because of that one grant per investigator model, the MIRA grants are longer. They're 5 years instead of 4 years, which is the average for an NIGMS R01. And on average, they're larger than NIGMS R01s in terms of budgets. Very important aspect of the program is that we give investigators a lot of flexibility in terms of the research they do. So there are no specific aims associated with the grant the way there are for R01s. So you're not asked to predict, and say exactly in detail what experiments you're going to do moving forward for the next 4 or 5 years. Instead, we're very clear that investigators can change the research direction as new ideas occur to them, as new observations are made in their lab. And we think that this is really, really important, that this is the way science really works, that a new observation leads to a new set of experiments, which may lead to a new major breakthrough. And so by giving this flexibility, we think that we're allowing investigators to do the most creative research and also to have the largest chances of making those breakthroughs that can lead to major changes in medical practice down the road. In addition to making the grants a year longer, one of the goals was to make the grant very stable so that investigators weren't constantly worried about losing their funding, which we reasoned would also allow them to do more ambitious and creative research. And so we've tried to make the renewal rates for MIRA awards very high. And so far we've succeeded. And they're actually at this stage about twice what they are for renewing an R01. So in the first set of renewals we did last year, the average renewal rate across the program was about 80%, which is almost unheard of for an NIH program. There are two versions of the program. There's an early stage investigator version. So people who are doing research in NIGMS's mission area and qualify as NIH-defined early stage investigators, or ESIs, which means that they have not had a major NIH research grant yet, and they're within 10 years of getting their doctoral degree or finishing their medical training, can apply for this program. So that's one version. And importantly, the early stage investigators grants are reviewed separately from established investigators. So they're reviewed by their own panels, by themselves. They're not being compared to established investigators the way researchers applying for R01s are. And we think that's also an important innovation in this program. Then we have an established investigator version of the program. So for established investigators, these are defined as people who have at least one single PI NIGMS R01 equivalent grant. They can, when they come in for renewal, apply instead to convert their R01s or R01 to a MIRA. And recently we opened that branch of the program also to what are called new investigators. So these are people who have not had a major NIH research grant, but who don't qualify as early stage investigators because they're somewhat later in their careers. And the reason we opened it to new investigators was because we reasoned that would bring people who hadn't been supported previously or had lost their support, and more diversity of institutions, regions, research questions, et cetera, into the program. So this is the first year we've allowed that. I just want to emphasize that the research must be within NIGMS's mission, the scientific missions of the Institute, so that fundamental research that I talked about and the clinical areas that we cover. And so if you are advising investigators about applying for the MIRA program, or if you're thinking of applying it for it yourself, very important that you should contact or suggest that they contact a program officer at NIGMS first before they write their application, so that we don't have a situation where we have to turn their application away because it's actually not in the mission of the Institute. Now, in terms of the growth of the program, this plot shows the percentage of our R01 equivalents, the R01 type grants that we give that were MIRA. So the first year we gave the MIRA grants was 2016. And you can see that ever since then, we've had a steady, almost linear growth in the percentage of our R01 pool or R01 equivalent pool that was MIRA, such that last fiscal year, we got to almost 50%, 48%. And our strategic plan has a target that by 2025, we would like this pool to be at least 60% MIRA. And you can see that we're well on course to meet that by 2025. So clearly the program is attracting applicants and is growing along the lines that we're hoping it would grow, and becoming the dominant mode with which we fund fundamental research at NIGMS. Looking now at early stage investigators, this plot shows from 2013 to 2022, the number of early stage investigators that received awards, new awards from NIGMS each of those years. And you can see that it grew from 89 in 2013 to 319 last fiscal year, 2022. And we're on track to get close to that again this year. So, I mean, very important fact here, and kind of striking, is that we have actually tripled the number of early stage investigators we fund each year since 2013. And we, NIGMS funds the most, or the last 4 or 5 fiscal years funded the most early stage investigators of any NIH institute or center, despite not having the largest budget. If you look at the distribution in 2022, 31 of the 319 early stage investigators we funded got R01s, 268 got MIRA awards, and 20 got New Innovator DP2 awards from the Institute. This number of 319 represents the highest number of early stage investigators that NIGMS has supported since the creation of the early stage investigator category. So it's a record. And as you can see, we've done that by design. We've specifically targeted as one of our strategic objectives, growing the number of early stage investigators we support. Importantly, last year, nearly 85% of these ESIs, and you saw the raw numbers up here, but that constitutes nearly 85% of the ESIs we funded were supported by MIRAs. And so this has become by far the dominant way that we support early stage investigators, and we expect that to continue to grow. And since the start of the MIRA program in 2016, the number of early stage investigators has doubled, and actually the number of applications from early stage investigators has also about doubled. And so somehow that program seems to be drawing early stage investigators in, which is certainly something that we hope to see, and it looks like it's working. You can learn more about the funding rates, trends of the MIRA program from this feedback loop post here, if you want to see more details. Now, we have been monitoring the MIRA program very closely and comparing it to the R01 program in terms of various different kinds of data types. One that we look at is the demographics to see whether the demographics of the MIRA pool is different than the R01 pool. On the left, we've broken the comparison of R01 versus MIRA, those are the R35s, according to different racial ethnic demographics. EI is established investigator, ESI, again, early stage investigator. So R01 on the left, R35 on the right. And the thing to focus on in this plot is the sort of plaid, green plaid colors. This is investigators receiving that kind of award who are from underrepresented groups. And the salient feature here is that the early stage investigator MIRA pool is about twice as populated in people from underrepresented groups as any of the R01 pool or the established investigator MIRA pool. And so that's encouraging that somehow the MIRA program is drawing in more applicants from underrepresented groups. And this is reflected, I'm showing the awards, but this is also reflected in the applicant pool as well. And so, although, one might like to see it more diverse, I think that's moving in the right direction in terms of who's applying for these early stage investigator MIRAs. We can also look in terms of gender. So this breakdown is men in the blue bars on top and women in the brown bars on the bottom. The R01 pool consistently has been at NIGMS about 25% women and 75% men. That's true for early stage investigators as well as established investigators. The established investigator MIRA pool is a little bit more represented in women, about 27%, but the early stage investigator pool, similar to the underrepresented racial ethnic category, is significantly higher represented in women, about 1/3 women to 2/3 men. So it's not 50-50, but it is moving towards a more equitable and population representative distribution. One concern there was about the MIRA program when we started it was that it was going to disadvantage women applicants because the review focuses heavily on the PI and the PI's track record. And so there was a feeling that perhaps women would not promote themselves as much in the applications as men would. But we actually haven't seen that effect at all. Throughout the history of the program so far, women have performed at the level of review in terms of their scores just as well as men. And in actually some fiscal years, they have outperformed men in terms of their scores. And that was statistically significant. We don't know what it means. We don't know why, but the effect that people were worried about does not seem to have materialized in the program. Another striking feature of the program has been that for the early stage investigator MIRA, both applicants and awardees, they are getting their awards, they're applying and getting their awards earlier and younger than NIGMS R01 funded early stage investigators. And you can see the data here. The MIRA is on the bottom in the green lines, and the R01 is on top in the orange lines. So both applicants and awardees are younger in the MIRA program, and that has been consistent throughout the life of the program so far. And we don't know why this is true, but 60% of the investigators applying for ESI MIRAs in 2022 did so within 2 years of getting their first assistant professor or equivalent position. And we would like actually to see that move even earlier. So we're very explicit in the program that we'd like people to apply as soon as they get their faculty positions. And we've made clear to the reviewers in the funding opportunity announcement and in their, their training sessions that the applicants are not expected to have preliminary data or publications from the independent labs, and that we want to see them apply right out of the gates. So we're hoping to move this number even earlier. Now I want to transition to our training, workforce development, and diversity portfolio, which I mentioned is the biggest at NIH. This schematic shows the programs that NIGMS supports in this area across the career pathway continuum. And I'm not going to go through all of these by any means, but the main salient point here is that we support the development of the research workforce across the entire career pathway, starting at the pre-K through 12 stage with our SEPA program and going all the way to independent faculty positions with programs like SURE. And everything in between. The reason there are multiple programs at the same career stage is because they target different institution types or different groups of investigators or students in these cases. And so the programs have slightly different goals or orientations. I want to just highlight one program for you as an example. This is a new program called MOSAIC, and this targets the transition between postdoctoral research and faculty careers with the goal of building diversity in faculty positions. So as I mentioned, the goal of the MOSAIC program is to enhance diversity of faculty in research intensive positions. It has two parts. The first is a diversity-focused K99R00. So that provides support for scholars beginning in their late-stage postdoctoral studies and then going into their independent faculty positions. So the K99 provides funding for them as postdocs, and then when they get a faculty position, the R00 provides support for the early stages of their faculty position while they're starting their lab. The second part of the program are mentoring hubs that are funded through cooperative agreement grants called UE5s. And these have gone to professional societies, the Association of American Medical Colleges, the American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, and the American Society for Cell Biology. And we actually hope this year that we'll fund one in microbiology as well. And we'd like to fund one in the future in neuroscience. And what these professional societies are doing is providing additional mentoring, skills development, and career development activities for cohorts of the scholars who are put together based on their scientific interest and then associated with one of the professional societies. So for instance, they give them mentoring in how to apply for faculty positions. They give them advice as they're doing that. They help them navigate the negotiation process when they're made offers. And then when they start their faculty jobs, they give them, development of skills such as lab management, budgeting, grant application process, et cetera. And so we hope by this additional mentoring to increase their success in research and in being independent investigators. So NIGM has started this program. We manage it, but it's become a trans NIH program. At this point, 23 NIH institutes, centers, and offices participate in MOSAIC and will make awards. In the first 2 years of the program, so we started funding in fiscal year 21. So in the first 2 years of the program, 80 K99 awards were made, which was a lot more than we thought, and has led to our need to expand the number of mentoring hubs. And those were given by 16 institutes and centers. So many of the institutes and centers across NIH have already participated and made awards. And of course, this fiscal year, we're making additional ones. And that led to about a 50% success rate, which again is almost unheard of across NIH. So, very important point here is these awards have high success rates at the moment. So hope that will encourage people to apply. Of the MOSAIC scholars, both in terms of the awardees and in terms of the applicants, so this reflects just the pool of applicants, 80% about were women and about 70% underrepresented minorities. So again, this is meeting its goal of building diversity based on that applicant pool we're getting. This is a little stale data right now, but as of 6 months ago, at least 27 of the scholars of that 80 initial 2-year cohort had already started or accepted faculty positions. So impressive results right out of the gate. And then we post all of the scholars' bios on our website. You can see them here. So if you're in a position of being someone who is involved in hiring at research intensive institutions or mentor someone who is in such a position, we'd encourage you to go to this website and look and get to know some of these scholars. This is an incredible pool of very diverse and very talented researchers who will be the next generation of people making Nobel Prize winning discoveries and breakthroughs in medical research. Few new programs that either just came online or are going to come online soon. The first is called Advancing Research Careers, or ARC, which will be launching in the next, hopefully 6 months. This is analogous to the MOSAIC program, except that instead of targeting postdoc to faculty transition, it's targeting late-stage graduate student to postdoc transition. It's very analogous to the MOSAIC. It has a diversity-focused, instead of K99R00, F99K00. So the F99 is to support the student while they're a graduate student. Then when they get a postdoc, the K00 kicks in and supports their first couple of years as a postdoc. And the hope is that these students would then transition potentially into the MOSAIC program and then into independent faculty careers. And the model is the same as MOSAIC. They're going to be cohorts of scholars based on their research interest, and they will be associated with mentoring centers the way the MOSAIC scholars are. NIGMS runs the Medical Scientist Training Program, which some of you may have heard of. This is the program that funds dual degree clinician scientist training at many of the top in terms of NIH funded institutions across the country. Many of the MD PhD programs in the country are funded through the MSTP. And the program has been very successful in terms of producing clinician scientists with dual degrees who go on to careers both taking care of patients and doing research based on what they see in the clinics. One disadvantage of the program, however, is that most of the MSTP grants have gone to the top NIH funded institutions across the country. And one understands why that happens, but that does lead to a certain dampening of the regions of the country that can take advantage of this funding and the kinds of institutions that are supported by the funding. And so we started just recently a second branch of the MSTP called Leading Equity and Diversity, or LEAD MSTP. The eligibility for this is limited to historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, and IDEA state institutions. And I'll tell you in just a second, if you're not familiar with the IDEA program, what IDEA state institutions are. We started the program last year. The first due date was in February of this year, and there will be one due date for applications a year in January moving forward. And so we hope to get excellent applications from these institutions and thereby be able to broaden across the country the institutions that are supported to train clinician scientists and help them get dual degrees. And then finally, we will be starting in the next year, we hope, a training grant program for tribal organizations to provide support, both stipend and tuition or mission support, as well as mentoring for undergraduates and graduate students. And so stay tuned for that as well. And then I just want to end by telling you about NIGMS's IDEA program. So this is a congressionally mandated program that supports research capacity building, research and career development in states that historically haven't received large amounts of NIH funding. And those states are shown here. There are 23 states and Puerto Rico. Those are the states in blue that are IDEA states. When I got to NIGMS 10 years ago, actually almost to the day, I didn't know very much at all about the IDEA program. And so I sought out Fred Taylor, who ran the program, and asked him to tell me about it, and very quickly realized that this was one of the most powerful programs, not just at NIGMS, but I think at NIH. And so I have, I think, become one of the biggest champions for this program. I think it makes a tremendous difference and allows us to tap into this incredible talent that without this program would be lost to biomedical research into the nation. And those discoveries that are being made by these researchers and will be made in the future by the next generation of researchers are enabled by the IDEA program. So the IDEA program has a number of parts. The three biggest ones are the IDEA Networks of Biomedical Research Excellence, or INBRAEs. These are statewide networks that link one or more research-intensive institution in each of the IDEA states to the primarily undergraduate institutions in those states. And the goal is to build that pipeline of students who are exposed to and able to conduct cutting-edge biomedical research, and then to hopefully get them, to go into doctoral degree programs and thus become associated with the biomedical research enterprise, either as researchers or as careers, supporting the research enterprise. Then there's the Centers of Biomedical Research Excellence, or COBREs. These are thematic scientific centers that can go to institutions in IDEA states. And their goal is to build the research capacity of those institutions, one or more institutions associated with the COBRE, in broad scientific areas that are of strategic importance to those institutes. So they could be something like structural biology, they could be cardiovascular research, they could be cancer research, depending on what the institution is trying to build at that time. They have a focus on building infrastructure to support that kind of research, but very importantly, they also have a focus on early career independent researchers. So one of their primary goals is to bring in early career independent researchers, give them resources to do pilot research, to get their programs off the ground, give them mentoring associated with the programs, and then try to get them to funding independence with other kinds of grants, whether they be R01s or MIRAs or other grants from other federal agencies or other funding agencies. And then finally, there's the IDEA Clinical and Translational Research Programs. These are aimed at developing the clinical and translational research capacity in IDEA states. They're sort of the moral equivalent of the CTSA program, but for IDEA states. Those are also a very important part of this, this ecosystem that we've built with the IDEA program. A number of studies have come out recently showing the efficacy of particularly the INBRAEs and the COBREs. I'll just share a couple of recent ones with you. These are studies done in Oklahoma by Darren Akins and colleagues. Darren is a former member of NIGMS's advisory council and runs the INBRAE there. The first paper focused on the student outcomes. So remember, the INBRAEs are networks that are aimed at bringing undergraduate students into the biomedical research enterprise. And this paper showed that students who participated in the Oklahoma INBRAE had a 100% increase relative to control students who didn't participate in the INBRAE in those who completed professional degrees such as MDs or DOs, and 175% increase in students attending biomedical science graduate programs. So that's really quite impressive in terms of those outcomes versus matched control groups. The second paper, they looked at the effect that the INBRACE had on the participating faculty. Most of these faculty are at the primarily undergraduate institutions. They can receive pilot grants, research grants to support research with the undergraduates to develop, again, that talent pool. And they showed that the faculty receiving these research project investigator grants through the INBRACE were 12.5 times more likely to receive a grant award of any type, and 4.5 times more likely to receive a federal grant than the control group that didn't have this support. So these are just examples. There are the number of others about specific INBRACE and their outcomes and specific COBRAs. But it's this kind of data that makes me one of the biggest proselytizers for the IDEA program around. I think that the good this is doing for the nation and for science is really quite impressive. So with that, I will stop, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Fantastic presentation, Dr. Lorsch. Thank you so much for all that great information. I would like to start with a few questions that came to my mind as you spoke.
Sure.
So I think broadly for all of these programs, you mentioned a number of areas that you're looking towards, increasing diversity of applicants. So that's both, like racial diversity, socioeconomic diversity, location diversity, even just female versus male applicants. I'm sort of curious how overall NIGMS is looking to measure the success of these programs and what you envision your ultimate big goal for these to be.
Well, I think the overall goal, as you mentioned, is to broaden participation in the research enterprise. So there's talent all over the country in all kinds of institutions and all kinds of regions, in all kinds of groups, and it's very important to tap into all of that talent, because you never know where the next big discovery is going to come from. People from different backgrounds, from different regions with different life experiences, ask different questions and think about things in different ways. And so getting those different questions asked, getting those different life experiences brought to bear and answering those questions is critically important. So that's the overall goal, is broadening that participation and getting more talent and more ideas and more questions asked and answered. In terms of the outcomes, I should have mentioned that the INBRACE program in the IDEA that I mentioned, we're actually right now finishing up an evaluation, a formal evaluation of that. The panel just met this week to do that. And we have a formal process that we do in the Institute for evaluating our programs. It starts with a very deep data-driven data dive that our data analytics team does. That takes months to collect all the data. Then we impanel a working group of our council that looks at all the data, that asks additional questions, asks for more data. They then meet, which is what just happened for the INBRACE program, come up with their observations, and then put forward recommendations. That's presented to our advisory council, which further discusses it. And then that all goes on our website, followed by a presentation to our council about what we're going to do in response to the evaluation. And then that also goes on our website. We've made big changes to our programs based on those evaluations. So, I think it's easy to say you're going to do something, whether it's build diversity or, some specific scientific outcome, but we feel that it's of paramount importance to make sure that your programs are actually meeting their goals, that those are the right goals, and using what information you can from data analytics and modeling to improve the performance of those programs. And we've ended programs that weren't performing according to their goals, and we've made pretty much everything that's gone through this process. We've made significant, I think, changes and improvements to.
Yeah, that's great. I love thinking of it in terms of, like you were saying, like, having the opportunity to have more questions answered. I think that's a really great way to frame increasing DEIA in this sort of context. I like that. One question that I had that was also echoed by a number of participants on the call today, so I want to make sure that we get to it. is the idea that a lot of early career researchers now have an increasing interest in seeking opportunities that build transferable skills. So, things like, building science communication skills, advocacy, public engagement, all towards an interest in building a more diverse and sustainable scientific enterprise. And, there are some instances where early career researchers are, discouraged or even actively banned from pursuing these opportunities. And knowing that these opportunities are typically sometimes even not recognized towards success on applications, but are really vital to ensuring the sustainability of the overall scientific and research workforce. I'm interested in how NIGMS is working to change this sort of culture so that, the next generation of scientists can feel free and able to pursue these, opportunities to participate more in science communication or public engagement. And also, if NIGMS is looking to make sure that these communication skill building opportunities are included in awards like the FTK or R awards, and that universities have resources to offer that as well.
Yeah. So that's an excellent question, Tori, and it's an issue we recognized, probably 10 years or more ago. And what the sort of data behind this is that it was clear then that 20% or maybe even less of people get PhDs in life science go on to become independent faculty members. So, at some level that is that, it's not that the other careers are the alternative. At some level, that's a alternative career because it's the minority of what people are doing, albeit an extremely important one. All these other careers support the research enterprise in various ways, as you alluded to, in various very important ways. It could be going into industry and doing research in the biopharmaceutical industry. It could be, doing policy work, as you said, communications, et cetera. So what we did, since, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are the biggest funder of training programs at NIH, we put into the funding opportunity announcements of our training program specific language, strongly encouraging the programs that we fund to make sure they are considering this broad range of careers that their graduates will go into that all support the research enterprise in different important ways, rather than just thinking about academic research. And so, for example, we strongly encourage programs to build into their training opportunities for students to do internships outside of the academic environment. That could be at a company, a small business, a large pharmaceutical company or something else, or, in policy and regulatory areas, et cetera. We also, ask them in the application to say how they are going to try to change this culture so that there's support for, people doing a broad range of things and building those transferable skills that you mentioned. And, many of those transferable skills are important no matter what career you go into. So, the ability to communicate clearly, if you're going to be a scientific researcher running your own lab, critically important. But if you're going to be doing anything else, in the workforce, also critically important. Management would be another example.
That's great. I think my last question that I know that I had that was also echoed by some of our audience questions as well is whether or, how NIGMS is doing work around the broader discussions around postdoctoral pay, quality of life, given that there are really large implications for, the postdoctoral discussions on the long-term sustainability of the research enterprise.
Yeah, excellent question. So there is an advisory committee to the NIH Director Working Group right now that I'm a member of that is examining those exact questions. What is the future of the postdoctoral research experience look like, and what changes should NIH make to how we support that, experience in that system. So I can't tell you what's going to come out of that group yet because the deliberations are still going on. So what I'm going to say is now my own opinion, but I think it's clear. A few things to me are clear. One, as we said, a majority of people who get PhDs do not go on into independent academic careers. And yet the postdoc, by and large, was designed for people who are going to go on to independent academic careers. And so I think you need to think very carefully about opportunity costs, that someone who goes on and does, a 5-6 year postdoc, and then goes into a career that did not need them to do a postdoc, had a very large opportunity cost during the postdoctoral time, which isn't to say it didn't add value, but had they gone straight into their other career, they would have been that far ahead in the promotion ladder. They would have been that far ahead in learning the skills in the actual career. Other things like benefits, retirement benefits, they would have been ahead. And so that's an important discussion, I think, that everyone needs to be having in the community, is who should be doing a postdoc and why. And it's probably a smaller segment of people than are going into it now. And we're hearing more and more that industry is hiring people straight out of graduate school increasingly. And that's also shifting this, equation, that if industry doesn't feel that it needs people to have done postdocs, that's going to further shrink the pool of people that should do a postdoc, right? So that's one thing I think that needs to be considered, is that opportunity cost issue. Certainly cost of living, and the length of postdocs, I think, need to be examined. I personally would be in favor of significantly raising the NRSA stipend for postdocs, but with the caveat that that will mean there will be fewer postdocs supported. But again, I think that's probably for the good. And then the last thing I'll just say, which is a general point related to this, but I think important for everyone to consider, has to do with lab size. And that's something that I have been sort of on a soapbox about for a long time. I think this model of people, running labs of 15, 20, 25 or more people is not productive, not efficient, and certainly not sustainable. And I think there needs to be a right sizing of the academic research lab model, such that, the idea that you're going to have 5, 6, 10 postdocs in your lab is not realistic for you. It's not a good, efficient, way for science to be organized or investing. And it's not good for the people who are doing postdocs who don't really need to be doing postdocs.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that we have a few other audience questions, so I'd like to invite my colleague Jacqueline to join me and make sure we get to some of those before the end of our time today.
Great. Thank you, Tori and Dr. Lorsch, for this fantastic discussion. We do have a lot of questions from the audience. I'll get to just a couple. So first question for MIRA, how is NIGMS related research defined?
So that's up on our website, and you can see, so, as I said, fundamental basic research in general, but not all basic research is NIGMS. So most institutes and centers fund basic research. So for instance, most neuroscience basic research is not in NIGMS's mission. What you should really do, though, is go to our website, find the program officer whose research areas seem closest to what you want to do, and send them an email and ask them to consult with you about whether what you are proposing is in our mission or not. That's really the safest thing and the best thing to do.
Great, thank you. Next question, are established investigators with R01 grants from institutes other than NIGMS eligible to apply for a MIRA award from
No,
NIGMS?
not unless they have an R01 from NIGMS.
Got it, okay. Okay, next question. How are different technologies such as augmented/virtual reality being used in researcher training programs?
Well, that's an interesting question. And actually, so we do have some equity in that space, so to speak. For example, NIGMS manages and will take over actually funding for the National Cryo-EM centers that were started with common fund support. And part of that program has been, in addition to supporting the actual centers, to support training for people to learn how to do cryo-EM. And one of the training modules that we supported was virtual reality, where people can, put on goggles and actually manipulate the instruments without actually having the instruments. So they can in advance, get some feel for how you, set up the microscope and the experiments, and then go to the actual facilities and do it. So that's one example, but I think that will probably grow over time with that same kind of model, that it's kind of a democratizing way that you can learn the basics of doing something before you actually do it.
Wow, that's very interesting. So I will turn it back over to Tori.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Lorsch. This has been great. I'm sure that we all have so many more questions for you. Such an interesting and important topic. But knowing that we're at the end of our time, just want to end with some quick housekeeping before we go. I hope everyone can join us for our next Alliance discussion that will take place on August 23rd at noon Eastern Time. Our special guest speaker will be Eric Fatimi, Principal at Cornerstone Government Affairs, who will give us a refresher on all things appropriation. We'll discuss the differences between discretionary, mandatory, and entitlement spending, various ways each house has applied the debt ceiling budget cap, side deals, emergency spending, and much more. We'll do our best to keep the conversation short and as jargon-free as possible. So I hope you'll all join us, and thank you again for joining us today, and we hope we'll see you soon. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.